Welcome to another Swordmaster Publications presentation. My name is Ernie Lawrence. Today we're going to be studying Judges chapter 15. This is a continuation of the story of Samson. Samson gets several chapters in the book of Judges. He's one of the more prominent figures that we see in this book. And I'm going to continue on with the things that I had mentioned in chapter 14 about how this was part of a process that God was guiding Samson through to stir up the Philistines, to cause conflict between Samson and the Philistines, with the ultimate end of freeing the Israelites from them. And so in chapter 14, we saw that Samson was, I guess, prompted or came up with a plan with God's approval to become engaged to this Philistine woman. And then he ended up generating conflict from this relationship by a riddle that he had made, and then he ended up slaying 30 of the Philistines, kind of as an excuse. Like the whole party was an excuse to do that, and he does this from time to time. He's going to come up with these reasons why he can take out some more Philistines, and he's really pressing against this nation that has come up and captured Israel, and is kind of their overlords. And you're even going to see in this chapter that the Israelites in this region, Judah and Dan, are upset, and they're like, don't you know that these guys rule over us? Why are you stirring them up? You're going to make things harder for us. And Samson is working to free them from these people. So one of the things that we talked about in the last chapter is this idea that Samson doesn't ever actually marry this woman. The word for woman and wife and betrothed are all the same word, and context has to determine that. The idea that Samson never actually married her, that they had a kind of a betrothal feast, or we might call it an engagement party, is what we see in the last chapter. But before he marries her and does anything with her as husband and wife, he gets angry because of her wheedling and whining and betrayal of him to these 30 so-called friends of his from the Philistines. And so he leaves in anger, and her father gives her to another man to be his wife instead of Samson's. And so that's kind of where we pick up here in chapter 15. But we're going to see again that God is with Samson through this and providing that strength for him the whole way. And so this isn't something that Samson is doing off. A lot of people view Samson as this guy who's kind of reckless and out of control a lot of the times. And maybe he is to an extent, but God is working with him and through that to bring an end to the Philistines, to bring Samson to where he needs to be, to bring an end to the Philistines' rule over Israel. And so that's what we're seeing in these chapters. So let's go ahead and get started in Judges chapter 15 and verse 1. It says, "But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his betrothed, it's not his wife yet, but she's kind of like that in their eyes, with a kid that is like a baby goat. And he said, I will go into my betrothed into the chamber, but her father would not suffer him or permit him to go in." What is this talking about? What is going on here? Well, if you look in Genesis chapter 29, verses 23 through 25, this custom of going into the woman is going into the bedchamber to consummate the marriage, to kind of, they don't have the same kind of ceremony idea that we do, where there's like everybody gathered and they go up to the front of some kind of building or beautiful garden or whatever, and a guy is up there and he's talking about it, and I now pronounce you husband and wife, and they kiss, and then that's when they're married. The process for these people is the bedchamber. That's what actually makes you married, is going in to consummate the marriage. And that's one of the reasons that fornication and going in, especially like with the prostitutes, the temples in the New Testament, was such a big deal, because going into their chamber to do those kinds of things was as if you were getting married to them. And that doesn't mean that you are. It doesn't mean that we're talking about, oh, if I went into a prostitute, I'm now married to her. But because it was on that same level of intimacy, or it was the same kind of thinking, by joining yourself to a harlot like that, you are defiling your eventual marriage bed by doing that. And so Samson has a bit of a change of mind here. He goes, he brings her a kid. That's a gift to kind of reconcile. And he has this idea that he's going to go ahead and go in and marry her by going into the bedroom, the chamber here, to consummate that marriage. But the father says, you can't do that. I've already given her to somebody else. So Samson doesn't actually ever get to marry this woman uh, because of the father-in-law, because of what he has done. He is the one that made the decision to give her to one of the Philistines instead. And so in verse 2, the father explains why. The father said, I verily thought that you had utterly hated her, therefore I gave her to your companion. Now notice this companion is one of those 30 men. They're not really his friends. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray you, instead of her. So the father-in-law is actually scared of Samson to an extent. Samson's a muscular dude. He's a very scary looking dude. He's got this long hair. He's kind of a wild man. He's out there killing lions with his bare hands and just literally ripping them apart and that kind of stuff. And the father-in-law knows about the 30 men that he went and slew in Ascalon. And so he's like, okay, yeah, I gave the woman that you wanted to marry my daughter to one of your friends, but what about my younger daughter? She's better looking than the older daughter that you were going to marry. Why not marry her? And of course, it's about physical beauty, and we kind of get back to a Genesis 4 and a Genesis 6 kind of thing, where they're really focused in on the physical beauty of the women, and not the more inner beauty kind of things. And so the father-in-law is pleading with Samson to, take my other daughter. And remember, Samson is still looking for a reason this whole time to stir up the Philistines so that he can fight them and free Israel. And so Samson says in verse 3, concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. So he's going to do something bad to them. But he now has his justification for doing so, because they wronged him. They took his betrothed and gave her to somebody else. And, they it's kind of a betrayal. And so this is the plan coming to fruition here. Samson has done nothing wrong, but they have done Samson wrong by giving her to another. And so now he's going to antagonize the Philistines even further because of that. So Samson goes in verse 4, and he caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put a firebrand in the midst between the two tails. So he takes the foxes, he ties the foxes together by the tail. And in between those tails, he puts a firebrand. This is kind of like a small torch. So these foxes are trying to get away from each other in opposite directions because they're trying to get away from the fire in between them. And as they do that, they're released into this cornfield. And it's all of these different kind of cornfields of the Philistines near this town. And so it says in verse 5, and when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. So he's taking out corn, grapes, and olives. These are big money makers for this area. And so he's taking out their food, and he's taking out their luxury items, and he's destroying all of this in retribution for them taking his betrothed and giving her to somebody else. And so then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite. So they're claiming that he is the son-in-law, but again, this is a relationship based on betrothal. They have not consummated the marriage at this point, but they're trying to associate him with this guy, looking for somebody to blame, because he, that is the father-in-law, had taken his betrothed and given her to his companion. And so the Philistines come up and burn both the woman and her father. So they kill both of them because of what Samson did. Now, this allows Samson to take it another step. So right now, all he has done is he's burned some crops in retribution for what happened. Now they went in and killed her and taken a life, and so Samson then gets to step it up and go against them even further. And you're going to see this escalates quite a bit. Samson said unto them, though you have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. So this idea of those who killed his bride to be, his wife to be, and her father, he goes in and kills them. And this is an act of vengeance. And then he says, look, that's all I'm going to do. I'm just getting vengeance for the evil that y'all have done to me. I'm not going any further than that. And so he kills it with a great slaughter. And then he goes down and dwells on the top of the rock of Edom, which is nearby. And like, remember, the city of Timnah is on the border of Judah and Dan, and Philistia. So he's right there on the border, but the rock of Edom is in the land of Judah. And so it's nearby, but it's in the land of Judah. It's not in the land of Philistia. And so the Philistines go up in verse 9 and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in the area of Lehi, which again is a border area. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? In other words, these guys are already under the control of the Philistines. And they're like, you already rule over us. Why are you now coming up against us as an army? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up, to do unto him as he has done unto us. So now there's this kind of back and forth that's been set up between Samson and the Philistines. Mm-hmm. Samson says, I've been wronged. I'm going to do this to you to avenge myself. The Philistines say, well, you avenged yourself. You did this to us. So now we're going to come back and do this to you. And it's going back and forth, but it's escalating. It's getting bigger. So Samson is able to justify taking out more and more of the Philistines, which is the whole goal in the beginning anyway. So verse 10, I gotta finish this. And they answered, to bind Samson we are come up to do to him as he has done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock of Edom. So these are the Israelites. These are the men of Judah that do this, not the Philistines. And they said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? So they're acknowledging that rule there. And they say, what have you done? This is kind of like when Moses goes into Egypt and he talks to Pharaoh about letting him go. And then Pharaoh's like, well, if you guys have enough time to go worship your God, then you have enough time to go gather your own straw. And the Israelites complain to Moses and say, hey, what are you doing? You're making it worse. And so now these guys are like, Samson, what are you doing against the Philistines? You're making it worse. They already rule over us. What more are you trying to get them to do? And so, what is this that you've done to us? And he said unto them, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them. So here's that back and forth, right? He's saying pretty much the same thing the Philistines just said in verse 10, right? To bind Samson are we come up to do to him as he has done to us. And then Samson is, as they did unto me, so I've done unto them. So this back and forth, this building up of the conflict is continuing. And then verse 12, and they said unto him, we are come down to bind you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear to me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. Samson allows them to capture him. He does not have to do that. Samson is strong enough that, and we're going to see that here in a second, he's going to be versus a whole bunch, that he's able to say, no, you're not going to bind me at all. I'm not going down with you. But he allows them to, because this is part of the plan. Okay? And so he says, I'll let you bind me, but you got to give me your word. You got to swear to me that you're not going to try to kill me yourselves. And they spoke unto him in verse 13, no, but we will bind you fast. That means they're going to bind you pretty solidly and deliver you into their hand, but surely we will not kill you. So they're not going to take his life, but they are going to bind him. And it says they bound him with 2 new cords. And that's important because new cords are, it's kind of like green wood. It's tough to break. It's very solid. Um, it's not like old, dried out, easy to snap kind of cord here. These are brand new, and they're going to be really really tough to break. And brought him up from the rock. Okay, so they bring him to the Philistines. And then verse 14, when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and it says, the Spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him. Again, we have God working through Samson, because this is part of the plan. The whole idea is to end the Philistine reign over the Israelites. But this time we're not doing it with an army, we're doing it with one man. And so that's why this plan is happening, is because there's a process to it that Samson needs to stir them up and take them out apart at a time. Okay, so the Spirit of the Lord, or the Spirit of Yahweh, came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. So he's there, and once he's with the Philistines, he just pops the cords. I'm reminded of a scene out of Superman, when with the Henry Cavill Superman, where they handcuff him and they lead him into this interrogation room, and Lois Lane is talking to him or whatever, and asks a question, and then he stands up and he just pops the handcuffs and goes right up to the window because he can see them. He's like, look, I'm not gonna hurt you, or whatever. But that just it reminds me of how easy Samson is able to just break these new cords as if they were nothing. Okay, and so he doesn't say anything. He doesn't speak. He's been delivered to the Philistines. He finds a new jawbone of an ass. So he finds this donkey, and remember, they're not, again, the Israelites are not supposed to really be touching dead things. But Samson is going against the Philistines. And so he's going to be killing, and that alone is going to make him unclean. So this is the weapon he has at hand. He picks up this jawbone, puts forth his hand, took it, and slays 1,000 men. So he kills 1,000 Philistines with this jawbone. And then he speaks. He says, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. Okay, he is going against the Philistines. He is taking them out. This is no different than any of the other judges that we've seen who have gone to war against the wicked nations that have come to rule over Israel. And so this is the way that Samson is doing it. He doesn't need Gideon's 300. He doesn't need the Deborah's army. Like none of the things that we've seen before. It's like as we go through the judges, we need fewer and fewer people. Now we're down to one man. He's a one-man wrecking crew here. So verse 17, and it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi. And I actually meant to look this up and I forgot to look it up, but I will do this now. Ramath Lehi. Lehi is the place, of course. That is the location, but I want to know what Ramath means here. So it comes from Ramath, height of a jawbone. So I guess height is Lehi, and then jawbone is Ramath. So placed by the rock Elam in north Judah, near the border of the Philistines. And I'm gonna look it up just to make sure. Yeah, Ramah or Ramath. So Ramath is height. And that's interesting because that means that the place called Lehi, where they came to, means jawbone. So what that tells me is that when we look at this, we go up to let's see here. So they spread themselves in Lehi. The Philistines went up. So this place is already called Jawbone. Right? They're coming here to this place called Jawbone. That tells me that most likely that's not the name of the place at this moment. When the Philistines come up and they come to this place, it doesn't really have a name at all. Remember, the book of Judges is written much later. It's a record of things that had transpired in the past. And so the names that we're seeing here are put in there by the writer of the book of Judges, I believe is Samuel. And so we're getting these names after the fact. And so the idea that it was called Jawbone is probably just a shortening of the longer Ramoth Jawbone, because Ramoth is what means the height. I thought Lehi meant height, but I was wrong about that. So anyway, Samson gives it the name. It's still called that at the time of the writing of this book. And then it says, and he was sore athirst and called on Yahweh and said, you have given this great deliverance into the hand of your servant. So Samson acknowledges that this is the plan. He acknowledges that this is God working through him to accomplish an end goal, and that is the deliverance of the Israelites from the Philistines. Samson is acknowledging all of that. He is saying, look, this plan has come to fruition. I've taken on the Philistines and I have had victory because of you. Now I'm going to die thirsty. I'm going to end up not being able to continue on with this plan because I'm so very thirsty. And you're going to allow me to fall into the hands of these uncircumcised Philistines because I'm thirsty. And so in this acknowledgement, Samson is giving God the glory, and he's also giving God the he's essentially giving to us the means by which we can understand that this is indeed God working through Samson. This has been the plan all along. This is not Samson going off on his own doing his weird Samson stuff, because he's a crazy man and he's just out there doing whatever he wants, and somehow he's stumbling into this vengeance against the Philistines. That's not what's happening at all. God has been with him this whole time. God has been empowering him this whole time. And now God is going to provide for him to take care of even his thirst, because Samson has been serving God. He has been doing what God wants him to do this entire time. And so verse 19, it says, but God clave a hollow place that it was in the jaw. Remember, this is the jawbone of a dead animal. It's supposed to be unclean. But out of a hollow place that was in the jaw, there came water there out. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. So the water refreshed him. And he was like, oh, I can imagine him. This is worse than 2-a-days. When I played football in high school, and 2-a-days in the middle of August in Texas, here we are dying of thirst. And every 15 minutes we were going to the water hose thing that they had set up for us or whatever, just because it was so hot all the time. He's done way more than football 2-a-days. He's killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey and taken them out. And so he's very, very thirsty and feels like he's gonna die from it. Heat, and he's faint and whatever. And he's like, God, I did what you said, but I'm dying of thirst. Help me out here. And so God provides water for him, because it is true that Samson is doing the will of God. And so therefore he called the name thereof En Hakkore, which is in Lehi unto this day. So that specific spot is in Kahore. So let's find out what that means. En Hakkore. Oops. There it is. En Hakkore. Spring of one calling. Spring of one calling. Okay. So he calls the name of the place the Spring of One Calling, which is in Lehi. So that place in Hakkore is in Lehi, jawbone, unto this day. Now, what that does is that tells me that, again, the names are given at the time that Samson names them. They aren't names that were there before, but Samson is giving these names at this time. But in the time of the writer of the book of Judges, which is later, those names still stick to this day. So that's why we see unto this day here. That's what we mean, is to the time that the book of Judges was actually written, which is much later. Samson is not writing this. Samson does not record this. He is the one doing all the action, but by inspiration, the writer is writing down these accurate and true stories of the history of the Israelite people. Okay, and then it says in verse 20, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So during this time, Samson is there, and again, when we say judge, this idea of the judging, yes, people would come to him, and there would be this kind of leadership quality about Samson, but really what the judges were deliverers. In all of these cases of judgment, we see here this idea of delivering from wicked nations. And so he judged, or he delivered Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. It took him 20 years to accomplish what he needed to accomplish because he's only one man. All right. So that's going to bring us to 15. We'll probably, here in the next couple of days, be able to wrap up Samson. We'll get into chapter 16. But this, I think, is a really good chapter for really showing what I was talking about in 14, that this isn't something of just Samson going off on his own and being this kind of reckless, womanizer and crazy person or whatever. I think that this is Samson's plan with God's assistance and his support to bring judgment against the Philistines. And I really think truly that if you put these two chapters together, you see that this isn't Samson being reckless and doing wrong things. He's actually doing what God is prompting him and assisting him in doing. And so you may disagree, and that's fine, and we can talk about it. But that is what I'm drawing out of this text as I read through it and trying to understand what it is that the text is actually saying. And I see that rather than what is commonly taught by a lot of people about Samson. So thank you for joining me again for this walk through the book of Judges. I always look forward to comments and conversation. So find me on social media somewhere, wherever this is posted, and we can talk about this as you would like. My name is Ernie Lawrence, and this has been another Swordmaster Publications presentation. We will see you next time.